Welcome back to the Aria across the 19th century. So picking up now with Verdi. Now Verdi's early career coincides with the height of bel canto, but as he developed and got more experience and matured, he became impatient with the standard conventions of bel canto structure, particularly, but also with the bel canto vocalism. But in his opera, La Traviata, which is really at the height of his maturity, he adopts a throwback to the bel canto cavatina cabaletta structure, but for dramatic purposes. So we have here the character Violetta, a courtesan, a professional mistress, essentially. Here she is singing in the background. I'll have to turn it off. Knows that falling in love with a younger man is not a good idea. But she can't help it. She knows that, and she expresses her real feelings here in the accompanied recitative beforehand, and how difficult it is for her. And then the orchestra starts up, and then she sings the andante, and here her true feelings come through. And the style of singing is very different than the casta diva. It's not highly embellished. You hear this melody, quel amor, di da 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 da. It's not very good. I'm singing 2 octaves lower, but you get this lyric singing that's simpler. It's frankly anybody could sing this melody. They wouldn't sound necessarily that good, but they could sing it. That is not the case with, you can't even sing the notes. The average person couldn't possibly sing the notes of Casta Diva. This is a less virtuosic style. So she sings these true feelings, and then she immediately castigates herself. That's the tempo di mezzo. It stops, basically accompanied recitative, and she says, this is folia. What I should do is what I've always done, which is party. To rejoice, to throw myself into the life of a professional mistress. So off she sings the cabaletta, the fast sempre libera, famous sempre libera. Now, in this case, the allegro represents not her true feelings, but this kind of pose she's going to take on. So off she's singing, and now this is true bel canto style. The coloratura vocal fireworks are going off all over the place. She's just singing cascades of cadenzas and melismas. But this Verdi is critiquing, using that as a critique, because that style is not her true self. Her true feelings are that more legato, quel amor, that she sang in the cavatina. So, to drive home the point, Verdi does something remarkable. He interrupts the cabaletta. From outside the window, ostensibly we're hearing Alfredo serenading her, singing back what she had just sang in her cavatina, the quel amor theme. Now, this idea that he's singing outside is really, he's really a cipher, because he couldn't have heard her. He can't sing her real feelings. He can't sing her melody. This is really her own voice coming back to her through his voice, her own feelings coming through. So Verdi, with that established, Verdi then has them sing in duet. This is not really a duet between Violetta inside her apartment and Alfredo outside the window. This is really a duet between Violetta's true feelings, voiced by Alfredo, and this pose that she's trying to embrace, that she knows is going to be less problematic emotionally. This party, sempre libera persona. Really amazing. One of the most dramatically astute maneuvers I've ever encountered in all of opera. It really is a hallmark of Verdi's genius. This is basically a duet between her heart and her brain. Guess which one's going to win? So, now that's sort of the last flourishing of the bel canto tradition in La Traviata. Over the latter course of the 19th century, we start seeing simpler aria structures, things that are really songs. This is particularly true of realistic operas. The greatest example of sort of realism in opera is Bizet's Carmen. It's based on the novella Carmen by Prosper Mérimée, which is a hallmark of the realistic tradition. So rather than singing these somewhat convoluted cavatina caballettas, Carmen sings essentially songs, but also dances. The most famous is the habanera, but also the seguidilla from the first act are both Spanish dances. And when Carmen sings, she dances. When she dances, she sings. For her, she sings in the gypsy dance, chanson et danse est mariée. Dance and song are married. So everyone knows the habanera. Showing two different Carmens, two different productions. One, a wonderful film by Ponnell with Julia McGinnis-Johnson singing the habanera, and then with Waltraud Meyer in the Metropolitan Opera production of from about 20 years ago, singing the seguidilla. Now, another example of a song with very, very different song. In this case, a simple folk song, or at least a simple folk song style, is the Willow Song from Verdi's Otello from 1888, actually 1887. Much later, 40 years after his earliest masterpieces. And here, Verdi is following Shakespeare's. Shakespeare uses songs in the middle of his plays, and so they are natural to incorporate in opera. But also, following Shakespeare interrupts the recitation of the song Desdemona singing in his play because, of course, she's very skittish. She's worried that her husband Otello is coming, which he is. So Verdi's does the same thing. So what you have here is a singing style that is ostensibly simple, folk-like, repetitive, just a strophic song with verses, but then recitative-like interruptions. And what emerges at the end, she calls in her chambermaid, Amelia, to say, and then says goodbye to her, knowing this very well may be the last time she can say goodbye to her, because her husband, Otello, has already expressed his intent. Her final words of farewell, Emilia, farewell, her vocalism just bursts forth in a way that's shocking almost. It's overwhelmingly emotional. You've actually seen this kind of singing before. You even see it in Violetta, and back in La Traviata in 1853, when she says also goodbye to Alfredo. He doesn't know it, but she's about to leave him. And she can barely contain her emotion. She's almost crying. And that theme is also based on the A Quel Amor theme. This kind of singing is unembellished, really an almost unmediated expression of raw emotion. I've given it kind of a term. I call it pregnant melody. And I've taken the name from the directions that Leoncavallo gives to Canio the clown in I Pagliacci for his famous Vesti la Giubba. You've probably heard this. It's one of the most parodied of opera arias. And he marks it plena, which means full. It means not just a full sound, but full of emotion. In fact, just overflowing with emotion. The character is he's acting crying on stage. And the idea is to overwhelm the listener. And you don't do it, you're not overwhelming them with vocal virtuosity. You're not impressing the listener with beauty. Even though the singing is usually beautiful, you want beautiful singing. But you're not impressing them with structure or embellishments or any overtly artistic features. You want raw, the composer wants raw emotion. So this is emotionally pulverizing music here, and this kind of pregnant melody. I give several features of it. It requires strong singing. It does not require much agility. So it's a different kind of singer than the earlier bel canto style. The orchestra is usually playing along. The singer is sort of riding the wave of the orchestra, and that functions to kind of amplify the sound. So. Singer's pregnant melody doesn't, it only comes at certain moments, but those are very memorable. They're kind of seared into the listener's memory. Keep this in mind as we move on to Verismo style. This is the hallmark of Verismo style. In fact, the Verismo style is not separated in these conventional numbers. You do have arias, but it's still quite fluid. You see this in Vesti la Giubba. Here's an example. There's a wonderful clip from Caruso singing. The audio is not great because it was recorded over 100 years ago. But you get a sense of his style. His kind of vocalism, his lyric vocalism. Now, Puccini's La Bohème is not officially a Verismo opera. No one kills, someone dies, but no one, you don't have the kind of murderous rage that you see in true Verismo opera. But it is very realistic in the kind of French realism sense. The characters are poor. They're very easy to identify with. The story comes from a famous novel called, it's just a series of stories by Henri Murger called Scenes of the Lives of the Bohemians. If you know the musical Rent, that's based on the same set of stories. The two characters, Rodolfo and Mimi, introduce themselves to one another. They're the opposite of the gods or the wealthy nobility or emperors that populate opera in the first couple of centuries, serious opera. They're as modest as they can be. And their arias themselves both begin quite modestly. They both begin with essentially just a little accompanied recitative, just repeating a single note, very simple line, not intensely emotional. But almost imperceptibly, they move into this kind of pregnant melody, which is full of feeling. And so you get, instead of rigid structures with cadences and moving on to a new tempo, what you get is an ebb and flow of emotion. Moments where it swells, moments where it comes back. And then the swells get greater until they overwhelm the listener. Not a coincidence that this is probably the most popular of operatic music, and these characters, Rodolfo and Mimi, the most popular of and sympathetic characters in all of opera. So enjoy. These are two excellent performances, probably the finest performance that I've ever seen. The San Francisco performance with Luciano Pavarotti and Morella Freni. Morella Freni is truly the greatest Mimi of her era.